I kicked my friend out of the house for this reason. Last night, my friends and I went to a club to celebrate one of their birthdays. We'll call him Dick. Dick was dropped off by his sister, whom we're all friends with. She wanted to come, but she had to work. So it was me, Dick, and 2 other friends. It was their birthday, since they're twins, and we celebrated a lot and for a long time. By 3 a.m., we were getting ready to go home. The twins had just left, and Dick asked if he could stay at my place that night since his sister was working. He said she would pick him up in the morning when she got off work. Reluctantly, I agreed. We shared an Uber, and he said he would pay me back later. We arrived at my apartment, where I was greeted by my cat, who is shy around people. She's a small brown tabby. My place had some trash lying around, so I quickly grabbed a garbage bag and started tidying up. After about 7 to 10 minutes, everything was clean, and the bag was full. I told Dick that I'd be right back to take out the trash. I stepped out without realizing I had left my keys inside the apartment. When I returned, my door was locked. I started knocking once I realized I didn't have my keys. No response. I kept knocking and started calling him, but he wouldn't answer. I could hear the TV and his laughter, so I knocked harder, and he decided to turn up the volume. My cat was at the door, meowing at Dick and scratching the doorknob. After about 10 minutes, I heard him approach the door, only to push my cat aside. She hissed at him, and she almost never hisses. I was furious. My exhaustion disappeared, and I saw nothing but red. I went around the side of my apartment and climbed in through my bedroom window, as it was the only one I had left open. I stepped into the living room only to see him in my fridge making a sandwich. I told him to get the fuck out of my house. He said, "Calm down, it was just a joke, dude." I wasn't having it. I told him to get the fuck out of my house, or I was going to beat his ass. He knew I was serious and tried to plead, saying he had nowhere to go at that hour of the night. I told him that wasn't my fucking problem, and that he should have thought about that before locking me out. I slammed the door when he left, and he called his sister, so she had to leave work early to pick him up. She called me the next morning and asked what had happened. When I told her my side of the story, she understood and apologized for her brother's behavior, even sending me money for half of his Uber ride. My friends called me, saying I was an asshole and that he was only staying for one night, plus it was just a joke and I had overreacted. So I'm coming to Reddit for the answer. Am I the asshole here? After that night, things became awkward with my friends. Most of them seemed to take Dick's side, arguing that it had all been a harmless joke and that I had gotten too angry. However, a few understood my frustration and said Dick had crossed the line. Still, I couldn't help but feel isolated. Dick's sister sent me another message apologizing again and offering to pay for the entire Uber, which I declined. It wasn't about the money, it was about respect. No matter how much I tried to forget, the situation kept replaying in my head. How dare he block me from entering my own home? And worse, how could my friends justify that? The following days felt strange. I stopped receiving invitations to hang out, and I noticed that some friends took longer to reply to my messages. I felt like they were excluding me, or at least, that's what I thought until one of my friends, whom I'll call Laura, messaged me asking to talk in person. She invited me to a coffee shop, and when I arrived, her expression was serious. I didn't want to say this over text, but I think you need to know. Dick has been telling his version of the story, and he's exaggerated a lot, she told me. He told everyone that you kicked him out in the middle of the night for no reason, and that you physically threatened him without provocation. I took a deep breath and ran a hand over my face. I couldn't believe it. And people believe him? Laura sighed. Some do, some don't. But the worst part is that he's trying to make you look like the violent guy in the group. That explained everything. Now, not only was I being excluded, but my reputation was at risk. I couldn't let it slide. If Dick was spreading lies, I had to do something about it. But how could I prove the truth without making it seem like I just wanted to start a fight? This problem wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. After my conversation with Laura, I felt like my patience had reached its limit. Not only had I been locked out of my own house that night, but now Dick was twisting the story to make me look like the villain. I needed to act, but I had to do it wisely. If I reacted impulsively, I would only feed into his version of the events. I decided not to rush and instead observe carefully. Over the next few days, I tried to gauge the atmosphere with my friends. Some seemed more distant, others acted the same, but something had definitely changed. Laura kept me updated on what was being said behind my back. And while I appreciated her support, knowing that my reputation was being destroyed for no reason was frustrating. One night, I received an unexpected message. It was from Tomas, another friend in the group who hadn't taken sides in the situation. "Can we talk?" the text said. Without hesitation, I agreed, hoping that at least someone else was willing to hear me out. We met at a nearby park. Tomas had a serious expression, and his body language showed discomfort. "I've heard a lot of different versions of what happened that night," he began. "I don't know what to believe. Dick is convincing, but his story has some gaps. Can you tell me your side?" I took a deep breath before responding. I told him everything calmly, without exaggeration or omission. I explained how I had been locked out of my own home, how Dick ignored my calls and turned up the TV. I mentioned my cat's reaction, my decision to enter through the window, and how I found him casually making a sandwich as if nothing had happened. I also explained that his behavior wasn't just disrespectful. It put our friendship at risk. When I finished, Tomas nodded slowly. "That makes more sense than what Dick is saying." According to him, "You kicked him out for no reason and almost beat him up for nothing. But what you're saying lines up more with how he's acted before. He's always had issues with boundaries." His response gave me a glimmer of hope. If I could convince more people of the truth, maybe the situation could be fixed. However, there was still a bigger problem. Dick was still spreading his version of the story, and unless I did something decisive, my reputation would keep deteriorating. The following weekend, I received another disturbing piece of news. A mutual friend posted a vague message on social media that was clearly aimed at me. Some people can't control their anger, and then they wonder why they end up alone. The post got responses from several people in our group, some supporting the message, others just laughing. Seeing that hurt more than I expected. The situation was escalating, and if I didn't take action, the narrative against me would end up defining who I was. Laura called me shortly after. "I think Dick is trying to isolate you from a group," she said with a worried tone. "He's talking to more people and making sure they believe his version. I don't know what he's trying to achieve, but he definitely doesn't want you to fit back in with us." That call confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't just a joke gone wrong. Dick was actively working to push me out of the group, and so far he was succeeding. I had to do something before it was too late. I decided to confront him face to face. I couldn't keep letting him twist the story to his advantage. I sent him a direct message. "Let's talk." His response came quickly. "For what? So you can threaten me again?" His cynicism annoyed me, but I kept my cool. "I just want to talk. We owe each other at least that much." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop the next day. When I arrived, he was already there, arms crossed, wearing a smug look that irritated me. I sat across from him, not breaking eye contact. "I don't know what you're trying to do with all this," I said bluntly. "But we both know the version you're telling isn't the truth." Dick smirked mockingly. "And what version is that? I'm just telling what happened. It's not my fault people believe me." His audacity caught me off guard. He had no intention of admitting anything, not even discussing the situation seriously. "You know perfectly well that I didn't kick you out for no reason. You locked me out of my own house and laughed about it. That wasn't a joke, it was a sign of disrespect." He shrugged. "You're making it a bigger deal than it is. It was just a joke, and you reacted like a lunatic." I took a deep breath to keep my patience in check. If it had really been a joke, you would have opened the door immediately. But instead, you waited and turned up the TV to ignore me. You can't justify that as just a joke. For a moment, he hesitated, but he quickly regained his arrogant demeanor. "Look, it's over. I don't have time to argue about this. If people believe me, it's because they prefer my version. That's how this works." That said it all. This wasn't about the truth, it was about manipulation. Dick knew he was lying, but he didn't care, because what really mattered to him was controlling the situation and the group's perception. I stood up without another word. There was nothing to gain from this conversation, but that didn't mean I was giving up. I knew I had to be smart about this and find a way to regain my place among my friends without playing into his game. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I glanced at my phone and saw a message from Laura. "How did it go?" I replied. "He won't change his story. This isn't over." After that conversation with Dick, I knew I wouldn't get him to admit the truth. There was no point in trying to reason with someone who clung to a lie just to benefit himself. However, I couldn't just stand by and watch as he took control of the narrative and manipulated everyone else. I had to find another way to level the playing field. I decided to start with the friends who hadn't been fully influenced by his version yet. I met with Laura and Tomas at a cafe, where I laid out my thoughts clearly. Dick has no intention of fixing anything. All he cares about is making sure the group sees me as the problem. And as long as he controls the story, he'll keep holding power over the situation. Laura nodded, looking concerned. That's true. Since all this happened, I've noticed how he's been making sure people believe his side of the story. It's not just about what happened that night. It's about making sure you're seen as the aggressor. Tomas, though more reserved, seemed deep in thought. To be honest, a lot of people in the group just go with whatever is easiest to believe. No one wants drama, and Dick is good at twisting things to make himself look like the victim. I took a deep breath, realizing they were right. Then maybe instead of trying to convince everyone that I'm right, I should let things play out on their own. If this is really how he is, sooner or later, his behavior will expose him. We agreed to keep an eye on things. Laura and Tomas would observe how conversations unfolded within the group while I avoided direct conflict with Dick. I knew that if I confronted him again, I'd only be giving him more fuel to twist the truth in his favor. The following days felt strange. Some friends barely responded to my messages, while others seemed indifferent. No one confronted me directly, but there was a noticeable chill in the air. While I wasn't officially an outcast, the distance between them and me was becoming more and more obvious. But then, something unexpected happened. One night, while scrolling through social media, I saw that someone had posted a sarcastic comment about people who can't take a joke and overreact. It wasn't hard to guess who that was aimed at. What was interesting, though, was the replies. Some people had started to question the story. One person wrote, "I don't know, but locking someone out of their own house as a joke seems pretty messed up." Another commented, "If it was just a joke, why is he still bringing it up weeks later? Seems more like a way to keep throwing dirt on the other guy." That gave me a small sense of satisfaction. Not everyone was blindly accepting Dick's story without questioning it. For the first time in days, I felt like the situation could start turning in my favor. The next morning, I received a message from an old friend in the group, Rodrigo. "Hey, I want to hear it from you. What really happened that night?" I told him everything exactly as it had happened. No embellishments, no exaggerations. He remained silent for a moment before responding. "That's very different from what Dick has been saying. I don't know why, but something about this feels off." Rodrigo became another unexpected ally. Slowly, more people began to question what they had heard. However, the real test came when we all met at a casual gathering organized by another mutual friend. I knew Dick would be there, but I decided to go anyway. I wasn't going to hide or avoid anyone. When I arrived, I noticed some people looking at me cautiously, but most acted normally. Tomas and Laura greeted me with a smile, which gave me a bit of confidence. I grabbed a drink and tried to stay relaxed. However, it didn't take long for something to happen that completely changed the course of the night. Dick was telling a story about another recent event when, without realizing it, he started contradicting himself. First, he mentioned that he had been at a certain place at a specific time, but then, in a different anecdote, he said something that didn't match up with what he had just stated. Some people noticed and gave him suspicious looks. Rodrigo, who has never had a problem questioning things, seized the moment. "Hey, Dick, that doesn't make sense. First, you said you were home early that night, but now you're saying you were with us until late. Which one is true?" Dick was momentarily speechless, but then he tried to brush it off with a nervous laugh. "Bah, I must have gotten confused. It doesn't matter." But it did matter, because at that moment, several people started to realize what I had known all along. Dick wasn't as trustworthy as he pretended to be. The conversation moved on, but I saw the glances being exchanged among the group. It was only a matter of time before more people started doubting him. Later that night, as the gathering was winding down, Laura approached me with a subtle smile. "I think his mask is starting to crack." Tomas, who had been observing everything, nodded. "If he keeps messing up like that, no one's going to believe him for much longer." I didn't respond, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had the upper hand. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The truth always has a way of coming out, and Dick was digging his own grave without even realizing it. However, there was still a long road ahead. I knew he wouldn't give up that easily, and if there was one thing I had learned about him, it was that he would do anything to regain control of the situation. I couldn't let my guard down. That night, before going to sleep, I looked at my phone and saw a message from an unknown number. It was short but spoke volumes. "I know what you're doing. Don't think this is over." I smirked to myself. Of course, it wasn't over. This was just getting started. The anonymous message on my phone made me think. I had no doubt about who had sent it. Dick wasn't someone who gave up easily, and that text showed that he was willing to keep playing his game. I wasn't too worried, but I did find it annoying. I knew this wouldn't end until he felt like he had regained control of the situation. I decided to ignore it for now. There was no point in giving it attention. Instead, I focused on moving forward. As the days passed, the tension within the group became more noticeable. Some people were beginning to distance themselves from Dick, while others simply avoided taking sides. Although the atmosphere was still uncomfortable, at least I no longer felt completely isolated. Laura and Tomas continued to support me, and Rodrigo had become a key player in the process. His direct way of speaking helped expose the contradictions in Dick's story, without me having to say a single word. Sometimes I didn't even need to intervene. Dick would get tangled up in his own lies all by himself. One day, while I was at home, I received a call from Rodrigo. "I think you should come to tonight's gathering," he said seriously. "It looks like Dick is planning something." I wasn't surprised. I knew that sooner or later, he would try to do something to restore his image. "Do you have any idea what it is?" Rodrigo hesitated. "I'm not sure, but I heard that he's going to talk about what happened that night. He'll probably try to reinforce his version of the story before more people start doubting him." That made me hesitate for a moment. I didn't want to fall into his trap, but I also couldn't let him keep spreading lies without being there to respond. In the end, I decided it was better to face the situation once and for all. When I arrived at the gathering, I noticed the atmosphere was tenser than usual. Some people greeted me normally, while others seemed to avoid making eye contact. I looked around for Laura and Tomas, who were sitting in a corner. They motioned for me to come over. "Dick has been talking a lot before you got here," Laura whispered. "I think he's waiting for you to do something so he can use it against you." I nodded, understanding the situation. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of reacting impulsively. I sat down and waited. It didn't take long before Dick took the floor, as if he had been waiting for the right moment. "Well, since we're all here, I want to clear something up," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Lately, there have been a lot of stories going around about what happened that night at our friend's house." He turned toward me, pretending to be cordial. "And I just want to make it clear that I never intended to make anyone feel bad. It was just a joke, but it seems some people took it way too seriously." A murmur spread through the room. Some nodded. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. I knew what he was doing. He wanted to frame the situation as a simple misunderstanding, so that I would look like someone who was overreacting and holding a grudge. I decided not to give him the satisfaction of an immediate response. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds before speaking calmly. "If it was really just a joke, why do you keep insisting on it so much? If it is all just a misunderstanding, why do you feel the need to justify yourself over and over again?" Dick blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Some of the people in the room also seemed surprised. I took advantage of the moment to continue. "I don't want to keep dragging this out," I said, keeping my tone steady. "But the truth is, you locked me out of my own home for no reason, ignored my calls, and mocked the situation. That's not a joke, that's disrespect." Rodrigo spoke up before Dick could respond. "He's right, Dick. If it really was just a joke, the logical reaction would have been to open the door immediately, not to drag it out." That comment made several people in the room nod in agreement. Dick tried to laugh, but his discomfort was evident. "Come on, it's not that serious." I didn't think he'd react that way. "And that's exactly the problem," I added. "You never thought about how I would feel. You only thought about how much fun you were having." The conversation could have ended there, but Dick wasn't willing to back down. "Maybe you're right," he said with fake politeness. "But I also think you overreacted. You kicked me out without giving me a chance to explain." This time, it was Laura who stepped in. "Explain? You turned up the volume on the TV to ignore him. How did you expect him to listen if you didn't even want to talk to him?" The tension in the room was palpable. For the first time, it seemed like Dick wasn't in full control of the narrative. I knew he wasn't going to openly admit anything, but at least now, he didn't have the same unconditional support as before. Eventually, the conversation shifted to other topics, and the gathering continued as usual. But something in the group dynamic had changed. The trust in Dick was no longer the same. I had planted the seed of doubt, and that was enough for now. As the gathering ended, Tomas approached me with a smile. "I think you took an important step today." Laura nodded. "Yeah, and the best part is that you didn't fall for his provocation. Now people are starting to see who he really is." I appreciated their words, though I knew this wasn't over. Dick wasn't going to give up easily, and he would probably try to find another way to regain control. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like things were finally starting to turn in my favor. That night, as I walked home, I checked my phone again. Another anonymous message appeared on the screen. "Enjoy it while you can. This isn't over." I smiled to myself. I didn't need to respond. I knew that the truth always finds a way to come to light, and now Dick was starting to realize it. The second anonymous message made it clear that Dick wasn't going to give up. This was no longer just about a lie that had spiraled out of control. For him, it was a matter of pride. He was desperate to restore his image and was willing to do whatever it took to prevent his facade from completely collapsing. But this time, I had the advantage. That night's gathering had been a turning point. It was no longer just my word against his. Doubt had begun to creep into the group, and while some still clung to the idea that it had all been a simple joke misunderstood, others were no longer so convinced. What Dick didn't realize was that the more he tried to justify his actions, the more he exposed his true nature. Laura, Tomas, and Rodrigo had become my main allies. They knew the truth and weren't afraid to speak up when necessary. Their support was crucial in the days that followed when Dick made his final move, a public confrontation. It happened at another group gathering in a park where he decided to make his last stand. He stood in the middle of everyone, wearing that arrogant smile that irritated me so much, and exhaled dramatically before speaking. "I think we've dragged this whole thing out for too long. But before we move on, I just want to make it clear that I never intended to hurt anyone." His gaze swept across the group before landing on me. "If anyone felt offended by something I did, I apologize. But I also think some people have exaggerated what happened just to make me look bad." Murmurs spread through the group. Some looked confused. Others crossed their arms with clear skepticism. Rodrigo rolled his eyes but remained silent. Laura and Tomas exchanged glances before she decided to speak up. "So now it's our fault?" she asked, not bothering to hide her disbelief. "It wasn't a joke, Dick. It was a selfish decision that left someone locked out of their own home while you ignored them and laughed. And now you want to disguise it as a misunderstanding." Dick frowned. "That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we're all acting like this is a huge deal, when in reality, we could have resolved it by talking." I took the opportunity to step in. "Yeah, we could have resolved it by talking. If you hadn't spent weeks spreading a distorted version of the story to make the group see me as the aggressor." Some people nodded. Dick tried to smile, but his confidence was starting to crumble. He knew he couldn't keep holding onto the lie much longer. Rodrigo delivered the final blow. "What bothers me the most isn't what happened that night. It's everything you did afterward. Instead of admitting you were wrong, you chose to manipulate the story to make yourself look good. And now, when you see that people are starting to realize it, you're trying to play the victim." Silence filled the air. Dick opened his mouth to respond, but immediately closed it again. For the first time since this all started, he seemed lost for words. He glanced around, searching for support from the others, but most avoided his gaze. The trust he had enjoyed for so long was vanishing. After a long pause, he simply shook his head and muttered something inaudible before turning around and leaving. The rest of the group remained in the park. At first, no one said anything, but little by little, they started talking about other topics. As if, with Dick's departure, a weight had been lifted from the atmosphere. Laura approached me and patted me on the shoulder. "It's over," she said with a smile. Finally, I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. It hadn't been easy, but in the end, the truth had prevailed. Dick had tried to manipulate everyone in his favor, but his own arrogance had betrayed him. In the days that followed, Dick practically disappeared from a group. Some said he was embarrassed. Others speculated that he simply didn't want to face the consequences of his actions. Little by little, things returned to normal. Over time, the story stopped being a topic of conversation, and the group's dynamic stabilized. I learned something valuable from this experience. It wasn't just about defending my reputation, it was about understanding that some people don't know how to take responsibility for their mistakes. And in their desperation to avoid accountability, they're willing to drag others down with them. However, no matter how much they try to control the truth, reality always finds a way to surface. I never spoke to Dick again after that. And honestly, I never felt the need to. For me, the story was over.